Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
You can
So,
read now.
are we going to see the film?
You can read from...
Aren't you going to screen the film?
Sorry?
The film?
The film has already been shown.
It's already been shown. Okay. Sorry. So I'll read, before we start the discussion, I'll just read for a few minutes from the book. Actually, I can read it right here. So this is from the first chapter. It's called Where Do Old Birds Go to Die? She lived in the graveyard like a tree. At dawn she saw the crows off and welcomed the bats home. At dusk she did the opposite. Between shifts she conferred with the ghosts of vultures that loomed in her high branches. She felt the gentle grip of their talons like an ache in an amputated limb. She gathered they weren't altogether unhappy at having excused themselves and exited from the story. When she first moved in, she endured months of casual cruelty like a tree would, without flinching. She didn't turn to see which small boy had thrown a stone at her, didn't crane her neck to read the insults scratched into her bark. When people called her names, clown without a circus, queen without a palace, she let the hurt blow through her branches like a breeze and used the music of her rustling leaves as balm to ease the pain. It was only after Ziauddin, the blind imam who had once led the prayers in the Fatehpuri Masjid, befriended her and began to visit her that the neighborhood decided it was time to leave her in peace. Long ago, a man who knew English told her that her name, written backwards in English, spelt Majnu. In the English version of the story of Layla and Majnu, he said, Majnu was called Romeo and Layla was Juliet. She found that hilarious. You mean I've made a khichdi of their story, she said. What will they do when they find that Layla may actually be Majnu and Romy was really Julie? The next time he saw her, the man who knew English said he'd made a mistake. Her name spelled backwards would be Mujna, which wasn't a name and meant nothing at all. To this she said, it doesn't matter. I'm all of them. I'm Romy and Julie. I'm Layla and Majnu and Mujna. Why not? Who says my name is Anjum? I'm not Anjum. I'm Anjuman. I'm a mehfil. I'm a gathering of everybody and nobody, of everything and nothing. Is there anyone else you'd like to invite? Everyone's invited. The man who knew English said it was clever of her to come up with that one. He said he'd never have thought of it himself. She said, how could you have, with your standard of Urdu? What do you think? English makes you clever automatically? He laughed. She laughed at his laugh. They shared a filter cigarette. He complained that Will's navy-cut cigarettes were short and stumpy and simply not worth the price. She said she preferred the many-day to Foursquare or the very manly red and white. She didn't remember his name now. Perhaps she never knew it. He was long gone, the man who knew English, to wherever he had to go. And she was living in the graveyard behind the government hospital. For company, she had her steel Godrej Almira in which she kept her music, scratched records and tapes, an old harmonium, her clothes, jewelry, her father's poetry books, her photo albums, and a few press clippings that had survived the fire at the Khwabgah. She hung the key around her neck on a black thread, along with her bent silver toothpick. She slept on a threadbare Persian carpet that she locked up in the day and unrolled between two graves at night. as a private joke, never the same two on consecutive nights. She still smoked, still navy cut. One morning, while she read the newspaper aloud to him, the old imam, who clearly hadn't been listening, asked, affecting a casual air, "Is it true that even the Hindus among you are buried, not cremated?" Sensing trouble, she prevaricated. "True? Is what true? What is truth?" Unwilling to be deflected from his line of inquiry, the imam muttered a mechanical response. "Sach khuda hai, khuda hi sach hai. Truth is God, God is truth." The sort of wisdom that was available on the backs of the painted trucks that roared down the highways. Then he narrowed his blind green eyes and asked in a sly green whisper, "Tell me, you people, when you die, where do they bury you? Who bathes the bodies? Who says the prayers?" Anjum said nothing for a long time, and then she leaned across and whispered back, untree-like, "Imam Sahab, when people speak of color, red, blue, orange, when they describe the sky at sunset or moonrise during Ramzan, what goes through your mind?" Having wounded each other thus, deeply, almost mortally, the two sat quietly side by side on someone's sunny grave, hemorrhaging. Eventually, it was Anjum who broke the silence. "You tell me," she said. "You're the Imam Sahab, not me. Where do old birds go to die? Do they fall on us like stones from the sky? Do we stumble on their bodies in the streets? Do you not think that the all-seeing, almighty one who put us on this earth has made proper arrangements to take us away?" That day, the Imam's visit ended earlier than usual. Anjum watched him leave, tap, tap, tapping his way through the graves, his seeing eye cane making music as it encountered the empty booze bottles and discarded syringes that littered his path. She didn't stop him. She knew he'd be back, no matter how elaborate its charade. She recognized loneliness when she saw it. She sensed that in some strange, tangential way, he needed her shade as much as she needed his. And she had learned from experience that need was a warehouse that could accommodate a considerable amount of cruelty. Even though Anjum's departure from the Khwabgah had been far from cordial, she knew that its dreams and its secrets were not hers alone to betray. Thank you.
So welcome to Heidelberg, Arundhati.
Thank you.
Among the many impressive characteristics that are called to mind whenever people talk about you,
Ooh,
there are adjectives
sound
like
horrible, yeah.
bravery, there's fearlessness, toughness. You yourself, you call yourself a tree deeply rooted, with deep roots. I think considered your environment, fearlessness is not a big word that describes your actually daily life. But behind that fearlessness is persuasion, there are values, there are principles. And I would like that you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, about your educational, your intellectual education. Where were your heroes? Did you have mother, brother, teachers?
Well, first of all, sometimes it's very hard to and I'm not very hard. It's impossible to control an image of yourself that's built up in the media, you know. It's just like goes from one thing to the other, and then you look at it and you wonder, is that really me, you know, because I'm not, I mean, honestly, you know, I'm not just saying this out of modesty, but fearlessness is not, you know, I don't think I've been tested so much yet, you know. People have been through so much more than I have and proved their mettle, you know. I'm somebody who let's say, I still am a person who enjoys myself immensely, you know, and I just keep sort of pushing the envelope a bit, and when I know that I have to retreat, I retreat. It's a tactical way of doing things, you know, and I think it's far more, I would say it's far more naughtiness than fearlessness, you know. No, honestly. Who are my heroes? Well, I grew up in the village in which the God of small things is set, ironham, and it's not a village in the traditional sense of an Indian village, because it's a village in Kerala, which is so different from much of the rest of India. And so I grew up in an odd way, though, because it's a very parochial place, and my mother's family, my mother comes from a community of people who are called Syrian Christians. They, unlike most Christians in India who are actually Dalits who convert to Christianity in the hope of escaping the scourge of caste, which of course they never managed to do, the Syrian Christians are a very wealthy landed community, although my family isn't and wasn't. And my mother committed the crime that Amu commits in The God of Small Things. She married outside, married a Hindu, got divorced, came back, and so I grew up outside the very firm grid of caste that exists, caste and community in India. You know, I've said this quite often, that the idea of India is this chaotic, cuddly toy democracy, Bollywood, yoga, Gandhi, anarchy, is only for outsiders, you know. But the anarchy is only in the traffic. It's not in society, because society lives in the iron grid of caste. And if you don't belong in there, I mean, of course, the oppression of Dalits and people who the Hindu caste system thinks of as untouchables is a different story. But for myself, I just wasn't, I mean, it was made very clear to me from the time I was very small that, you know, you're not a real Syrian Christian. No one's going to marry you. And none of them heard the deep sigh of relief in me when they said that, you know. But I grew up in a very unorthodox way. I didn't go to school for a long time. I was educated at home by my mother, and a lot of my education was the lack of indoctrination, because no one had much time. So I think my main upbringing, maybe my main training as a writer, was that I, from the age of 3 or 4, would spend hours and hours on the bank of the river catching fish. And, you know, one of my first, not my first, but one of my first essays was about why fishermen should rule the world. My first piece of writing was about Australian missionary teacher who taught me for a while, and she consistently told me that she could see Satan in my eyes. Maybe she was right, but my first coherent sentence was that I hate Miss Mitten and I think her knickers are torn.
But it's probably a very European approach or reaction to see you after this enormous success of your first novel. Then you commit yourself for 20 years to all kinds of social cases, political cases. You support very consciously and very aware of the need for use your prominence in this fight. And we very often see then a kind of library in the back. And you are listed, actually, in the list of public intellectuals, according to, well, Wikipedia or whatever. But, and then, you know, you have a close friend to John Berger, a really very prominent and outspoken writer. You are, I think, listed next to Noam Chomsky. So one would guess, we just celebrated 150th anniversary of the Capital. You know, we sort of immediately associate, yes, she has gone through training, a kind of,
well,
but did that happen? No?
Well, as you know, or maybe not, that Kerala, the state that I grew up in, was the first democratically elected communist government in the world, which, I don't know, maybe it's a contradiction in terms, because it was meant to be a revolution before you have a communist government. But anyway, there was an election, at least, and a communist government came to power. And I grew up in this place where the revolution was meant to be just around the corner, but of course it never came. But, to answer your question, I think what happened was that after I wrote The God of Small Things and was, celebrated in the way that I was, and when it won the Booker Prize, I was on the cover of every magazine, and exactly at that time, a right-wing, a Hindu right-wing cultural nationalist government came to power, and the first thing it did was a series of nuclear tests. And at that moment, what was acceptable to be said in public, the public discourse, just completely changed. And I was, of course, at that time, because I was on the cover of every magazine, and there was Miss Universe, there was Miss Arundhati Roy, and there was, all of us were the sort of pushed forward as the face of this new nuclear power, new economic superpower, new globalized, capitalized, corporatized place. And I, of course, had to step off that train, because it became obvious to me that speaking out and saying something and keeping quiet were both equally political. There was no neutral space for me at that point. So I wrote an essay which was called The End of Imagination. And it was about, it wasn't really about, nuclear deterrence and what it means to have nuclear bombs pointed at each other, India and Pakistan. It was more about what does it do to the imagination of a people to feel that now they have this nuclear bomb that unites them as a nation. It was such a toxic thing. And it turns out to be absolutely right, because I can almost date the change of the discourse in India into this absolutely unacceptable, toxic nationalism, beginning from there. And of course, when I wrote it, one of the sentences that got me into a lot of trouble was that I said, well, if it's anti-national and anti-Hindu to have this nuclear bomb implanted in my brain, then I secede, and I declare myself a mobile republic. So, of course, everybody was like, get out of here and go away and all that. But, while one lot of people were extremely angry, a whole other world opened up. And so my library, as you call it, was really the traveling deep into the valleys, the mountains, the rivers, the conflicts. And because you cannot, like in India, you can't just roll into a village. you have to, everything depends on how you go in, who you go with. You know, are you going in with the upper caste landlord? Are you going in with the undercaste? How do you approach a village, you know? And to me, it was really writing, thinking, learning from the dust and from the stones and from the water and from talking to people who I think are amongst the most brilliant people I've ever met, you know. So it ended up with 20 years of writing, because I just felt I couldn't be this celebrated writer, you know, going about her glittering career while I lived in a country with such deprivations, such conflict, and such beauty and such ferocious resistance. So I really definitely said, I'm on this side of the line.
So, but you sort of initially, you said, you talked about your modesty. We talked about braveness or fearlessness. You were modestly sort of taking...
No, I promise, yes, I'm not being modest.
But I think sort of seeing sort of the context of this Hindu nationalism, how easy it can lead to killings, and to just recently a list on which you are too, the first one in the row was killed a few days ago. So what does it need to write such an outspoken text, or whether essay or novel, in this kind of, is it the ability, the subtlety of deciphering a reality where you appear, where you speak? And
no, totally. I mean, there is no single gene in my DNA that wants to be a martyr, you know. So I am not interested in being the lone voice on the hill and, you know, sort of being this lonely figure who's pointing the way. I'm surely a writer who has a very individual voice in terms of the use and the craft of language, and that is mine, but it's always deployed from the heart of a crowd, you know. And it is extremely important to be tactical. It's extremely important to know, and that doesn't mean one will always be right, but to know when to say something, when to not, you know, when, and it's an incredibly complex process of decision making, because let's say there's a protest that's been planned, you know. For example, there's a wonderful example that there was a time when on the International Day of the Disappeared, a group of Kashmiri women whose sons and husbands and brothers had disappeared were addressing a conference or something in Delhi. Of course, nobody would ever make the mistake of reporting what they said in those days. So then, you know, they asked me, since I was one of those very, very few at that time, not now, but at that time, saying something clearly about Kashmir, I went, and the next day, the papers, what happens is there's a picture of me, no picture of the Kashmiri women, and it says Arundhati Roy on the day of the disappeared, which means nothing, you know. So do you go? Do you not go? Do you say something? Do you not say something? I mean, the last, this book, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I have not spoken in Delhi like I'm speaking to you. I've not spoken in my own city. I've not had a public appearance because for two reasons. One was that my previous book of essays, when it was launched, a group of people came and smashed up the stage and smashed up the musical instruments of a band that had been playing. And of course, when they came right here, I saw fear in their eyes because they knew that it wasn't a good idea to smash me up in front of people. So I said, hey, I paid them to do that. So their ferocity got diffused. But on the other hand, I didn't want to launch the book in Delhi because I didn't want the conversation only to be about them, because why should I, give them a stage to perform on an international stage? So I didn't. I'll do it in my time, So these are things you have to think about, and you don't know what will happen. I mean, Gauri Lankesh, it was the journalist who was shot last week. It was a new border that had been bridged by them, which is, it hasn't happened that they go and shoot a woman down like that. They've done it to many men. And you don't even know who is the they, because there are all these shadowy right-wing vigilante groups, and you don't know who's pulling the strings and who's pulling the trigger.
Yeah, and is there a rule of law that these crimes are persecuted?
No, in India, the chances of your being persecuted if you have been involved in mass murder are very small, or in assassination. It depends on who is murdered and who is raped, and you can be beaten to death on the street by a mob because someone spread a rumor that you were eating beef if you're a Muslim. But you can get away with killing many people even when it's filmed, and even when the killers come and boast about it.
It's so interesting what you're telling us. We hear a lot in German television and media about Putin and whatever kind of dangers journalists are in there, or in Turkey at the present, but very little of India. In India is sort of stereotyped by yoga, Gandhi, IT a little bit, but basically we still get our honey out of romanticism. And I think one hope is that everyone who reads Arundhati's books will get more reality. You, in this new book, Kashmir conflict has a very important role, even though the book itself, in a way, is also linked with 9/11 and the consequences for Muslims, and actually the Hindus are very proud and very happy that they get this kind of foreign support. Did Kashmir turn up in this story? Did you do the research in Kashmir, or was that by accident coming in?
No, I'm not the kind of novelist who does research. Somehow it seems quite a cold activity for me. So the Ministry of Utmost Happiness is not really about issues. It's about the air we breathe there. And it so happens that people generally, to avoid writing about caste, to avoid writing about Kashmir, to avoid writing about politics when it kicks down your door at 3 in the morning, is actually a very complicated yoga position, And when people ask me about the fact that my book is political, it's unashamedly political, and so was The God of Small Things, because that's what's in the air, to try and, to be able to have huge departments of Indology and studies of identity and nationalism, and not mention Kashmir and not mention caste, is a great art practiced by many liberal and left intellectuals as well, So the book is not about You know, to me, the essays that I wrote for the last 20 years now, these are interventions, they are arguments, they are empirical, they are moral, moral for me, they are always written at a time when something is closing down, and it's an urgent need, I feel, to blow that space open and to change as much as I can the paradigm of the argument that's taking place. But when I write a novel, I have no such urgency. I have taken my time over this because it's not about trying to make Western readers look at India or Indian readers, Northern readers look at this. It's about constructing a universe. It's about inviting people to walk through it. It's about love as much as it is about war. It's about poetry as much as it is about poverty. It's about people with huge, massive hearts as much as it is about how human society divides itself. It's about how people can blur the boundaries between life and death. So in this graveyard, Anjum eventually slowly starts to encroach on graves and builds a guest house, which she calls the Jannat guest house. And so you have a Jannat, meaning paradise in Urdu. So you have the Jannat guest house over a Delhi graveyard. And in Kashmir, which is often called Jannat for its physical beauty, you have a Jannat covered by graveyards. And really, you can't tell our stories, however private, however personal, however intimate, without saying that this is the air that goes into our lungs. This is what becomes oxygen in our veins, and we've got to think about it and write about it,
Okay, so, shall we have a German part now?
Sure.
Okay. Meine Kollegin Jutta Wagner liest Ihnen jetzt aus der deutschen Übersetzung, die von, lassen Sie mich das extra sagen, das ist nämlich wichtig, es ist nicht so leicht, von Annette Grube stammt, eine Passage, die sich auch mit Kaschmir beschäftigt.
Thilo war, wo sie fast jeden Abend war, an einem Teestand in einer der engen Gassen um den Dargah von Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia, auf dem Weg von der Arbeit nach Hause, als sich ihr ein junger Mann näherte, sich bestätigen ließ, dass ihr Name S. Tilotama war und ihr einen Zettel reichte. Darauf stand Kat Nummer 33, HB Shahin, Dal Lake. Bitte komm am 20. Die Nachricht war nicht unterschrieben, aber in einer Ecke befand sich die winzige Bleistiftzeichnung eines Pferdekopfes. Als sie aufschaute, war der Überbringer verschwunden. Sie nahm sich 2 Wochen frei von ihrer Arbeit in einem Architekturbüro am Nehru Place, stieg in einen Zug nach Jammu und fuhr am frühen Morgen mit dem Bus von Jammu nach Srinagar. Musa und sie hatten eine Weile nichts voneinander gehört. Sie fuhr, weil es so zwischen ihnen war. Sie war nie zuvor in Kaschmir gewesen. Es war später Nachmittag, als der Bus aus dem langen Tunnel herausfuhr, der sich durch die Berge bohrte, die einzige Verbindung zwischen Indien und Kaschmir. Der Herbst war im Tal die Jahreszeit unbescheidener Fülle. Die Sonne schien schräg auf die lavendelfarbenen, blühenden Safrankrokusse. Die Obstbäume waren schwer beladen mit Früchten, die orientalischen Platanen loderten. Die anderen Passagiere, überwiegend Kaschmiris, konnten die Düfte im Wind, der durch die Fenster wehte, auseinanderhalten und den Duft der Äpfel nicht nur vom Duft der Birnen und dem des reifen Reises unterscheiden, sondern sie wussten auch, an wessen Äpfel, wessen Birnen, wessen Reis sie vorbeifuhren. Und es gab noch einen Geruch, den sie alle kannten. Den Geruch der Angst. Er hing sauer in der Luft und verwandelte sie in Steine. Während der laute, rumpelnde Bus mit den stillen, schweigsamen Fahrgästen tiefer ins Tal hineinfuhr, wurde die Anspannung zunehmend spürbar. Alle 50 Meter stand auf einer Straßenseite ein schwer bewaffneter Soldat, wachsam und gefährlich nervös. Soldaten waren auf den Feldern, in den Obstgärten, auf Brücken und geschlossenen Kanälen, in Läden und auf Marktplätzen postiert. Jeder deckte den anderen in einem Raster, das sich bis in die Berge hinein erstreckte. An jedem Ort im legendären Kaschmirtal befand sich jeder, gleichgültig, was er tat, ob er ging, betete, sich wusch, Witze machte, Walnüsse knackte, mit jemandem schlief oder mit dem Bus nach Hause fuhr, in Schussweite eines Gewehrs. Und weil er sich in Schussweite eines Gewehrs befand, war er, gleichgültig, was er tat, ob er ging, betete, sich wusch, Witze machte, Walnüsse knackte, mit jemandem schlief oder mit dem Bus nach Hause fuhr, eine legitime Zielscheibe. An jedem Kontrollpunkt war die Straße mit beweglichen horizontalen Barrieren versperrt. Sie waren mit eisernen Dornen gespickt, die Reifen zerfetzen konnten. An jedem Kontrollpunkt musste der Bus anhalten. Die Passagiere mussten mit ihren Taschen aussteigen, die durchsucht wurden. Soldaten kontrollierten das Gepäck auf dem Dach des Busses. Die Fahrgäste hielten den Blick gesenkt. Am 6. oder 7. Kontrollpunkt stand ein gepanzerter Jeep mit Schlitzen statt Fenstern neben der Straße. Nachdem er mit einer im Jeep versteckten Person konferiert hatte, holte ein arroganter junger Offizier 3 junge Männer aus der Reihe der Passagiere. Du, du und du. Sie wurden in einen Armeetransporter gestoßen. Sie fügten sich, ohne zu murren. Die Fahrgäste hielten weiterhin den Blick gesenkt. Als der Bus in Srinagar ankam, wurde es bereits dunkel. In jenen Tagen erlosch mit dem Licht das Leben in der kleinen Stadt Srinagar. Die Geschäfte schlossen, die Straßen leerten sich. An der Bushaltestelle stellte sich ein Mann neben Thilo und fragte nach ihrem Namen. Von da an wurde sie von einem zum nächsten weitergereicht. Eine Autorikscha fuhr sie von der Bushaltestelle zur Boulevard Road. Über den See brachte sie eine Shikara, die keine Sitzgelegenheit bot, so dass sie auf bunten, mit Blumen gemusterten Kissen halb liegen musste. Eine Hochzeitsreisende ohne Mann. Zum Ausgleich, dachte sie, waren die Ruderblätter des Bootsführers herzförmig. Auf dem See war es totenstill. Das rhythmische Geräusch der Ruder im Wasser hätte der bange Herzschlag des Tals sein können. Platsch, platsch, platsch. Die Hausboote, die am anderen Ufer nebeneinander ankerten, Habe Shahin, Habe Jannat, Habe Queen Victoria, Habe Derbyshire, Habe Snowview, Habe Desert Breeze, Habe Samsam, Habe Gulshan, Habe New Gulshan, Habe Gulshan Palace, Habe Mandalay, Habe New Clifton, waren dunkel und leer. Habe, sagte der Bootsführer, als sie ihn danach fragte, stehe für Hausboot. Habe Shahin war das kleinste und schäbigste aller Boote. Als die Shikara sich näherte, kam ein kleiner Mann heraus, verloren wirkend in einem fadenscheinigen braunen Ferran, der ihm fast bis zu den Knöcheln reichte, um Thilo zu begrüßen. Später erfuhr sie, dass er Gulris hieß. Er begrüßte sie, als würde er sie gut kennen, als hätte sie ihr ganzes Leben hier verbracht und wäre gerade vom Einkaufen auf den Markt zurückgekehrt. Sein großer Kopf und sein seltsam dünner Hals ruhten auf breiten, kräftigen Schultern. Als er Thilo durch das kleine Esszimmer und den schmalen, mit einem Teppich belegten Flur ins Schlafzimmer führte, hörte sie Kätzchen miauen. Er lächelte strahlend über die Schulter wie ein stolzer Vater. Seine smaragdgrünen Augen funkelten. Der kleine Raum war kaum größer als das Doppelbett, auf dem eine bestickte Tagesdecke lag. Auf dem Nachttisch standen ein geblümtes Plastiktablett mit einem Wasserkrug aus Glockenmetall mit Drahtgeflecht überzogen, 2 farbige Gläser und ein kleiner CD-Spieler. Der abgewetzte Teppich auf dem Boden war gemustert, die Schranktüren waren grob geschnitzt, die hölzerne Decke war wabenförmig, der Papierkorb war aus klein gemusterten Pappmaché. Thilo suchte nach einer Fläche, die nicht gemustert, bestickt, geschnitzt oder auffällig verziert war, um ihre Augen auszuruhen. Als sie keine fand, stieg Angst in ihr auf. Sie öffnete die hölzernen Fenster, aber sie gingen direkt auf die geschlossenen Läden des nächsten Hausboots hinaus. Leere Zigarettenschachteln und Kippen trieben auf dem schmalen Wasserstreifen, der die Boote trennte. Sie stellte ihre Tasche ab und ging hinaus aufs Deck, zündete sich eine Zigarette an und sah zu, wie die gläserne Oberfläche des Sees sich silbrig färbte, als die ersten Sterne am Himmel auftauchten. Der Schnee auf den Bergen glühte eine Weile wie Phosphor, auch nachdem es dunkel geworden war. Sie wartete den ganzen nächsten Tag auf dem Boot, sah zu, wie Gulres die nicht verstaubten Möbel abstaubte und zu den lila Brinjal und dem großblättrigen Hack in seinem Gemüsegarten am Ufer gleich hinter dem Boot sprach. Nach einem schlichten Mittagessen zeigte er ihr seine Sammlung von Dingen, die er in einer großen gelben Plastiktüte aus dem Duty-Free-Laden eines Flughafens aufbewahrte, auf der stand: Schau, kauf, flieg. Er legte sie eins nach dem anderen auf den Esstisch. Es war seine Version eines Gästebuchs. Eine leere Flasche Polo Aftershave, eine Reihe alter Bordkarten, ein kleines Fernglas, eine Sonnenbrille, der ein Glas fehlte, ein abgenutzter Reiseführer von Lonely Planet, eine Qantas Kulturtasche, eine kleine Taschenlampe, ein Fläschchen mit einem pflanzlichen Insektenschutzmittel, eine Flasche mit Sonnenschutzlotion, ein Aluminiumröhrchen mit abgelaufenen Durchfalltabletten und eine blaue Damenunterhose von Marks & Spencer in einer alten Zigarettendose. Er kicherte und blickte durchtrieben drein, als er die Unterhose zu einer weichen Zigarre zusammenrollte und sie wieder in die Dose steckte. Thilo kramte in ihrer Umhängetasche und gab ihm für seine Sammlung einen kleinen Radiergummi in Form einer Erdbeere und ein Röhrchen, das Bleistiftminen enthalten hatte. Gulres schraubte fasziniert die kleine Kappe des Röhrchens ab und wieder auf. Nachdem er eine Weile nachgedacht hatte, legte er den Radiergummi in die Plastiktüte und steckte das Röhrchen in die Hosentasche. Er verließ das Zimmer und kehrte mit einem postkartengroßen Foto zurück, auf dem er die Kätzchen in den Händen hielt und das der letzte Besucher auf dem Boot gemacht hatte. Er überreichte es Thilo formell, hielt es ihr mit beiden Händen hin, als würde er ihr eine Verdienstauszeichnung verleihen. Thilo nahm es mit einer Verneigung an. Der Handel war perfekt. In einem Gespräch, in dem ihr zaghaftes Hindi auf sein zögerliches Urdu stieß, fand Thilo heraus, dass der Muskak, den Gulres mehrfach erwähnte, Musa war. Er holte einen Ausschnitt aus einer Urdu-Zeitung, auf dem alle die abgebildet waren, die am selben Tag wie Miss Jabin und ihre Mutter erschossen worden waren. Er küsste den Ausschnitt mehrmals, deutete auf ein kleines Mädchen und eine junge Frau. Schrittweise konnte Thilo die Geschichte zusammensetzen. Die Frau war Musas Frau und das Kind war ihre gemeinsame Tochter. Die Fotos waren so schlecht gedruckt, dass ihre Gesichtszüge nicht zu erkennen waren. Um sicherzugehen, dass Thilo verstanden hatte, legte Gulris den Kopf seitlich auf die Hände, schloss wie ein Kind die Augen und deutete nach oben zum Himmel. Sie sind im Himmel. Thilo hatte nicht gewusst, dass Musa verheiratet gewesen war. Er hatte es ihr nicht erzählt. Hätte er es ihr sagen sollen? Warum hätte er das tun sollen? Und warum sollte es ihr etwas ausmachen? Sie war es gewesen, die ihn verlassen hatte. Aber es machte ihr etwas aus. Nicht, dass er geheiratet hatte, sondern dass er es ihr nicht erzählt hatte. Für den Rest des Tages drehte sich endlos ein unsinniger Malayalam-Reim in ihrem Kopf. Es war die Monsunhymne einer Armee kleiner Kinder in Unterhosen, sie eins davon, die bei strömendem Regen durch schlammige Pfützen stapften und das dicht bewachsene grüne Flussufer hinunterflitzten und ihn laut herausschrien. Bang, bang, hier ist die Militärkapelle. Hochzeit im Haus des Landbesitzers. Reis aus Elefantendung, lecker. Gebratene Tausendfüßler, klecker. Gehackte Hühnerkacke als Gewürz. Sie verstand es nicht. Konnte es eine unangemessenere Reaktion auf das geben, was sie gerade erfahren hatte? Seit ihrem 5. Lebensjahr hatte sie nicht mehr an diesen Vers gedacht. Warum jetzt? Vielleicht regnete es in ihrem Kopf. Vielleicht war es die Überlebensstrategie eines Gehirns, das womöglich den Betrieb einstellte, sollte es dumm genug sein, einen Sinn in der komplizierten Laubsägearbeit zu suchen, die Musas Albträume mit ihren verband. Es war kein Reiseführer zur Hand, der ihr erklärte, dass Albträume in Kaschmir häufig den Wert wechselten, dass sie ihren Eigentümern untreu waren, dass sie schamlos Räder schlugen in die Träume anderer, dass sie keine Grenzen anerkannten, dass sie die allergrößten Überfallkünstler waren. Keine Befestigungsanlagen, keine Zäune konnten sie in Zaum halten. In Kaschmir konnte man Albträume nur umarmen wie alte Freunde und in Schach halten wie alte Feinde. Das würde sie natürlich lernen. Bald. Sie saß auf der gepolsterten, eingebauten Bank im Eingang des Hausboots und betrachtete den zweiten Sonnenuntergang. Ein dunkler Nachtfisch, kein Verwandter der Nachtmeere, stieg vom Grund des Sees auf und verschluckte das Spiegelbild der Berge im Wasser. Ganz. Gulris deckte den Tisch fürs Abendessen. Für 2, er wusste etwas. Als plötzlich Musa kam, der das Boot leise auf der Rückseite betreten hatte. Salam, Salam, du bist gekommen. Natürlich. Wie geht es dir? Wie war die Reise? Okay. Du? Okay. Der Vers in Thilos Kopf schwoll zu einer Symphonie an. Tut mir leid, dass ich so spät komme. Er gab keine weitere Erklärung ab. Abgesehen davon, dass er ein bisschen hager war, hatte er sich nicht sehr verändert.
Yes. Now, you're writing the novel in English. And one could imagine that, and you express this many times, Urdu is very close to people. Sort of, if you want to sort of establish sort of the homegrown authenticity, what made you decide to write in English?
Actually, Urdu is not...
or Hindi?
Yeah, Urdu and Hindi, there's Kashmiri, there's Malayalam. So, in fact, the truth is that this debate about authenticity now is a somewhat old one, you know, because there is no such thing. The most authentic thing is that we live in many languages all the time, every hour, every day, you know. So there are places like, say, in Kerala, you could say that most people speak Malayalam. But then if you write, if you write in Malayalam, then only people there will read it, right? There isn't any language that you can call an Indian language, solely one language. And whenever people have tried to impose that, there have been huge riots and self-immolations and so on. So for me, language was a very interesting theme in this book. Sometimes I thought, should I say the Ministry of Utmost Happiness translated from the original by Arundhati Roy, or translated from the originals, because there's so many different languages in the book. And eventually, the way I look at it is, of course, that it's a book written in English, but when you stare at it hard enough, like the surface of water, and you have these other fish of other languages floating just below the surface. So it's a book that attempts to be a novel in many languages, actually, at once, you know. And interestingly, it's not just the Urdu and Kashmiri and Hindi and Telugu that's in the book, but also many of the characters are, it's equally true of the people in the book, that the whole idea was for me to somehow, if The God of Small Things was a very intimate book about a family with a broken heart at its center, this is a book where it almost turns that inside out, and you have people who have shattered hearts, who bring these little shards together to make a mended heart. And almost every character in the book, I wanted to try and write a novel which was like a city, and you never walk past anyone, you know? And so it's complex, it's challenging, but you do have to stop and hear the story of how this person is here and what brought her or him to this place. And often many of them have their own stories to tell in the book, their own pamphlets, their own letters, their own translations of things. And so you also have a variety of English in the book. And, you know, earlier in the colonial time, and also until much recently, the British, and then many writers who are almost British, try to, in a way, make fun of Indian English, not trying to imagine how ridiculous they might sound if they were speaking Hindi or Malayalam or any other language. And here, actually, the English of each of these people is different and is informed by the language they know. So even its unusual grammar is given grace and space by the language that they know other than English. You know, so it's a lot of experimentation on the language front in the book.
Anyway, compared to the first novel, it strikes the reader how different this one is. So it obviously benefits from 20 years of essay writing and that kind of involvement. Would you agree that those two sources, the experience of the good of the small things and then the political commitment and the essay writing, they come together and form a new context in which a new flow could happen, even though the flow is a misleading term. Very often it's cut, and it's suddenly you sort of, it's something like Bert Brecht would call V-effect, you know, in the moment you commit yourself, you indulge in the reading, suddenly you are cut, and sort of you have to sort of re-establish your position. That's very interesting. I wasn't surprised that some of the people who talked to you thought this story is so fantastic that they always immediately associate magical realism. But of course, life in India is this way.
Well, yeah, I mean, often I think people, you know, Western people who have a very different reality think that the reality that they don't know is magical. Whereas actually, yeah. But actually, for example, a lot of, in fact, I asked someone, I said, tell me one part of this book which you think is magical realism. I have a joke, actually. Every time someone accuses me of magic realism, I show them a photograph. I say, here's the graveyard, here's the thing, you know, because right. It's actually, so he said, you know, this idea that somebody is living in the graveyard among graves and is gradually building a house. I said, okay, here are the photographs, you know, of people who live in graveyards. In fact, the rise of this Hindu-Nationalism and the ghettoization of minorities. Of course, as I said in this first chapter, you know, Hindus cremate their dead, and it's only Muslims and Christians who bury their dead and who have graveyards. So those graveyards are also becoming like ghettos, you know. So if you go to a shrine or a place where you have many graves of Muslim saints or Muslim people, and even graveyards, you'll find lots of people living around them and in them. There's nothing magical about that. You know, it's absolutely stark reality, you know?
Yeah.
So...
the characters, very prominent characters, and the reader would probably dwell on those, but actually the broad city, it's in a way reminds us that you studied architecture somehow. You're a city planner. Would you agree with this?
Oh, totally. You know, whenever someone asks me why I studied architecture, I always say in order to become a writer. You know, because to me it's the most, both in the God of Small Things and in this, the structure of the book has been of utmost importance to me. In the God of Small Things, it's, you know, you could think of it as a house and you're looking at it in different ways. But when I wrote the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I'm not talking about the setting, but in terms of how I wanted to approach the idea of a novel, you know. I felt, you know, in a way, maybe because of, you know, if you suddenly become very famous writing a particular book, there's the great danger of domestication. You know, everybody wants you to write that same book in a different way again. And I was not going to write the son of the God of Small Things, you know. And I wanted to write thinking of the structure of a novel like you would think of the structure of a city, where a structure of a great third world Delhi, like a metropolis like Delhi, where you have an ancient part, then the city planners try to plan it, and the people ambush the plan, and then it's planned again, and there are unauthorized constructions, and there are demolitions, and there are byways and highways, and ultimately a city always has a form which inscribes itself against the contours of nature, but that form comes about planned, ambushed, and I wanted to see if I could write where I looked at the way the modern world is, and all of us dealing with so many kinds of information, often irrelevant to where we are physically or geographically. And how would you walk through these lanes? how would you make a reader say, okay, you may not want to, but just stop and say hello, you know, smoke a cigarette, and ask this person where he came from. At least that's how I am, you know. I now can't think of, for me, the background suddenly becomes the foreground, the city becomes a person. Politics cannot be just a choice which only people who live very luxurious lives can make. Shall I be a political person or shall I be an interior designer? No, but in real life, in places like India or Kashmir now, you don't have those choices, you know. It's the background, the foreground, the main characters, the sub-characters. So the chaos is designed, you know, and it's like I didn't want to write a book in which, you know, which was like a creative writing school product, perfectly designed, you know. So it's something that's challenging in terms of what a novel should be. It's not comfortable. It shouldn't be comfortable. It should be a dangerous thing. You know?
And even in this novel, sort of, I remember the place when you left Kerala at the age of 16 and moved to Delhi. You first lived in a shag. And that shag, in a way, comes for Tilo, I think.
Oh no, that where Tilo lives is a few steps up from the place that I lived in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know.
I mean, yeah.
But
yeah.
I learned that
I did live in that place too. You know, which is right next to the shrine of a Sufi saint who's very beloved in Delhi, called Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia. And yeah, she lives there, and she actually, the characters in this book, Anjum, who I read about, Tilotama, who you read, and I mean, who was read to you about, and the others, all the characters have these borders running through them. Right. So Anjum is born to a Shia Muslim family in Old Delhi, and born a boy called Aftab. And then she becomes a woman and actually lives in another house in the old city, along with several other people who are similar to, but not exactly like herself. Tilotama has a border of caste running through her, like she doesn't know who her father is. And in my mind, really, she's the daughter of Ammu and Veluta, had the God of Small Things ended differently. And one of the other major characters is an intelligence officer called Biplab Das Gupta, who's called Garson Hobart by his friends, because that's a character he plays in one of his college plays. And in a way, he has a border running through him too, because half of him speaks with the voice and the ability to wait that a state has, you know. He has that, he can watch a murder before his eyes and put it into a historical context and not react to it. And the other half of him is a sort of thwarted, shambling, drunken lover who's very, very clear-eyed about himself and about the situation, and has a very important perspective. In a way, he's a character who'd be my, you know, who I would like to argue with. So it was a piece of madness writing him, because I didn't want a, you know, easy villain sort of person.
That in a way is a feature of the whole novel, that you have on one side you have a lot of brutality and atrocities of tremendous amount. On the other hand, you have this gentle moment. My colleague was just reading about sort of this meeting between Tilo and Musa. Very gentle, very refined, and sort of that in a way evokes a kind of India that has similar features. At the same time, you have all these violent rapes and so on. On the other side, it's such a country of so many colors and flavors and richness. and traditions that one could imagine. There is a reason why you do not go into exile.
Yeah.
Because you love that country. And could you imagine a solution for this patchwork of castes, of religions and so on, that could make India a polyphonic utopia?
Well, somebody asked me, you know, firstly, I don't think in terms of countries, you know, so I don't even know what we mean when we say India, because India's boundaries were drawn by the British, and then, you know, suddenly they became 3 countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. The violence of partition and the violence of assimilation of people who didn't want to be assimilated, all of that goes on. And to me, a country I think of as a perhaps necessary municipal administrative unit, but I don't have any great feelings of patriotism. But I love the place that I live in because I know it, you know, and I feel that as a writer or as anybody who tells stories, if you can only tell one kind of story, then it's not a real story, you know. To be able to witness without blinking the violence. There's a quote in this book by James Baldwin, which is very, very important to the book, which says, "And they would not believe me precisely because they knew that what I said was true." So the violence is not invented. In fact, each of the acts of violence is something that really happened in the time it happened, you know. But yet, how do people who go through that continue to live with the grace that they continue to live with? How do they continue to live? I mean, someone asked me about what it is that keeps me there, and I said, it is the fact that there is an imagination, which a wilderness of the mind, which has not been colonized and conquered yet. There is a living way of believing that there is another way to be happy. There is another thing that you can call civilization. And it's being suffocated, but it's still alive, you know, and is still being fought for by thousands of people. And this, to me, is the most precious thing about that place.
Yeah. Just one word there is the initial wonderful character, a hijra. Now, that as a social phenomenon is quite challenging for Europeans. This kind of taken for granted that this transgender citizens participate, can get even elected, lead many Europeans to associate India as a very liberal country. Now, is that true? Is sort of the acceptance of such a character?
It's a country, as I keep saying very often, it's a country that lives in several centuries simultaneously. And you see how there are certain practices which in the feudal times, in the Mughal times, or even the medieval times, were not perhaps legally prescribed as acceptable, but they were practiced. So if you read the memoirs of the first Mughal emperor Baburnama, he talks quite openly about homosexuality, whereas last year, or I think it was last year, that the Supreme Court actually criminalized homosexuality, you know. So on the other hand, the courts have actually legally accepted that there are more than two genders. But the hijra is a Urdu word which means a body in which a holy soul is trapped. And Anjum is a hijra. And hijras, again, you know, and the book, of course, traces that moment where there's a space, a violent space, a space, nevertheless, where hijras have in India gharanas, which is the same way that classical music has gharana, with traditions, homes, and each home has an ustad or a guru, and then it's a very tightly organized community. Cities are divided into territories, and each group then can go and ask for money where, you know, there are weddings or children are born. There's also a great deal of violence against them. And so there is the new language of legal, Western liberal legal rights. And it's all sort of happening simultaneously. So in the book, there's a moment where Anjum, who's always sought out by these foreign correspondents, because she's the, you know, story, the Delhi story, that the must-do Delhi story before anyone leaves their posting. And then gradually she gives way to the new person in the Khwabgah, the House of Dreams where she lives, who knows the language of rights and NGOs. And Anjum is one of the old exotics who's sort of, you know, retired.
Did irony help you?
I beg your pardon?
Irony, the concept of irony, which even sort of appears in a way in the title, Utmost Happiness, and we are then introduced to what it means to Dalits and so on. Is that a means for you for accuracy in the description, for distancing, of course, and then accuracy of the capturing reality?
Well, you know, I do believe that, you know, for a writer, just as for an athlete or a dancer or a musician, it's really important to be able to span the spectrum of what you do, you know? You can't be just pitched in one place. So everything is a part of this universe. Irony, horror, humor, absurdity, vulgarity, obscenity, love, you know, it's all part of the universe that one writes about. And I think even I wouldn't really say that the title is ironic, because there is a quest for and sometimes those moments of happiness are recognized in the most unusual ways, in the most unexpected places. And I think when you were asking me, you know, is there some place where, is there some utopia that one can dream about in that place that is called India? I'd say that, you know, the really painful thing about it is that it is a place where the heart of it, the engine that runs modern India and that has run ancient India too, is caste. The caste system, which is a form of social hierarchy, which is absolutely perhaps one of the horrific things that human society has come up with. And it isn't just a social hierarchy, it has a kind of religious sanction to it. So you're looking at a society that literally reveres injustice. And to me, I know that there is no society that is just, but it would be wonderful if one saw a yearning for justice instead of this revering of injustice. And that's what we dream about.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so we didn't ask for questions, is it? Okay. Anyway, I'm just going to end with a short reading. This is about Delhi, and it's a chapter called The Nativity. In fact, since we talked about language, I must say that the chapter begins with a quote from Neruda, which says, "In what language does rain fall over tormented cities?" And this chapter is called The Nativity. It was peacetime, or so they said. All morning a hot wind had whipped through the city streets, driving sheets of grit, soda bottle caps, and beady stubs before it, smacking them into car windscreens and cyclists' eyes. When the wind died, the sun, already high in the sky, burned through the haze, and once again the heat rose and shimmered on the streets like a belly dancer. People waited for the thunder shower that always followed a dust storm, but it never came. Fire raged through a swathe of huts huddled together on the river bank, gutting more than 2,000 in an instant. Still the amalthas bloomed, a brilliant, defiant yellow. Each blazing summer it reached up and whispered to the hot brown sky, "Fuck you." She appeared quite suddenly a little after midnight. No angels sang, no wise men brought gifts, but a million stars rose in the east to herald her arrival. One moment she wasn't there, and the next, there she was on the concrete pavement, in a crib of litter, silver cigarette foil, a few plastic bags, and empty packets of Uncle chips. She lay in a pool of light under a column of swarming, neon-lit mosquitoes, naked. Her skin was blue-black, sleek as a baby seal's. She was wide awake but perfectly quiet, unusual for someone so tiny. Perhaps in those first short months of her life, she had already learned that tears, her tears at least, were futile. A thin white horse tethered to the railing, a small dog with mange, a concrete-colored garden lizard, two palm-striped squirrels who should have been asleep, and from her hidden perch, a she-spider with a swollen egg sac watched over her. Other than that, she seemed to be utterly alone. Around her, the city sprawled for miles, 1,000-year-old sorceress, dozing but not asleep even at this hour. Gray flyovers snaked out of her Medusa skull, tangling and untangling under the yellow sodium haze. Sleeping bodies of homeless people lined their high, narrow pavements, head to toe, head to toe, head to toe, looping into the distance. Old secrets were folded into the furrows of her loose parchment skin. Each wrinkle was a street, each street a carnival, each arthritic joint a crumbling amphitheater where stories of love and madness, stupidity, delight, and unspeakable cruelty had been played out for centuries. But this was to be the dawn of her resurrection. Her new masters wanted to hide her knobby, varicose veins under imported fishnet stockings, cram her withered tits into saucy padded bras, and jam her aching feet into pointed, high-heeled shoes. They wanted her to swing her stiff old hips and reroute the edges of her grimace upwards, into a frozen, empty smile. It was the summer Grandma became a whore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, forgot.